In topic 9.9, we're focused on endangered species. And when we talk about biodiversity, species can be classified at different levels of potential threat to extinction. And so some of those levels are shown here in the upper right-hand corner. So obviously, if a species has become fully extinct, that means that species no longer exists. That species has been completely eliminated from the earth. If we move down a level, there are species that are extinct in the wild. They may be present in some small numbers in protected habitats or in zoos and other wildlife refuge, but overall they are no longer present in wild populations. And then we have the threatened group here. So there's different levels of being threatened with extinction. There's endangered is in the middle. Critically endangered is another level up. Vulnerable means a species could be moving on to these other levels. There's also near threatened species and the species of least concern. So these are all classifications of the potential harm to a species population size. We'll talk in the next topic about why species are being threatened, being endangered, why biodiversity is under threat. But the number of endangered species is on the increase, and we could see that shown in this graph in the lower left-hand corner. This is the number of endangered species that have been identified, and you can see that number when this data was produced had doubled between 2007 and 2019. And we can also see that that number breaks down by different types of species, mammals, reptiles, etc. And often what we see is that these species that are endangered or are threatened often are specialist species. Species that have very narrow habitat requirements, that require very specific habitats or food sources. They are often the species that can be endangered of becoming extinct most often. They can be competing with other species for resources and territory that could lead to their endangerment. Human activities such as development, the introduction of invasive species, or hunting of these species can lead to endangerment as well. The species that have more general niche, those species that can adapt to changes to their environment, are those that are more likely to survive these threats to their populations. We can see in North America, here's an example of some endangered species that are present in North America. The Florida panther, California condor, black-footed ferret, West Indian manatee, red wolf. So you can see some of those species listed in that diagram. And so in order to prevent species from becoming extinct, we're going to talk about one U.S. law, the Endangered Species Act, that was passed in 1973. And this law was passed in order to prevent the extinction of species and allow species to recover to a point where they no longer need to be protected by this law. And the law that was passed in the United States not only protects from the killing of this species, but also protects the ecosystems that are critical to their survival. It's implemented and enforced by the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife, is also for marine species by NOAA. New York State has 25 species that are listed under the Endangered Species Act. And the text of the act reads, federal agencies ensure that the actions they authorize, fund, or carry out are not likely to jeopardize the continued existence of any listed species or result in the destruction or adverse modification of designated critical habitats of such species. So species are placed on this, the endangered species list is what it's called, and then they are protected under this law. It's sort of like the Superfund law attempts to remediate listed sites that are on the national priorities list. Species are identified that are most under threat, and they are protected under the Endangered Species Act. And there are certainly success stories with the Endangered Species Act in the United States. Bald eagles is the most famous example. That bald eagles were extremely threatened. because of the effects of DDT on their reproduction. And they were placed on the endangered species list, and they subsequently have recovered and were delisted. That means they were taken off because they're no longer threatened in 2007. And we can see that there are bald eagles that are present all over the place. I've seen them, on the roadside. I've seen them over the lakes in Onondaga Lake. Bald eagles are not that rare anymore, whereas they once were very rare. There's other species, for example, plant species, the gray whale, different birds like the black-capped vireo that were protected under the Endangered Species Act, and their populations have since made a comeback so that they can then be delisted. These endangered species are also regulated by international treaties. The international treaty that governs endangered species and the trade in those species is called CITES. Stands for the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. And this is an international treaty, so like other treaties we've talked about, the Monterey Protocol, the Paris Accords, when countries come together under the United Nations, they can agree to sign into these treaties in which they commit to protect the biodiversity using different techniques. And then within these countries, there are different federal legislation, laws that are passed to meet the requirements of the treaty that the government has signed. And so the CITES Treaty ensures that there's no trade in any threatened species, wild animals, plants that would threaten their survival in the wild. There are 35,000 species that are protected under the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. Here are some examples of some of those species: African elephants, common hippopotamus, the black rhino. You can see their original range is the blue on these maps. And then there are the darker colored pink where the actual living populations have been identified. So you can see that the number of those species has contracted significantly. And why, and this graph shows you a little bit about why animals such as these herbivores are threatened. Some of it's from direct hunting for meat or for other body parts. You can see that here. Some due to agricultural practices like raising livestock. Others through development, habitat loss, or civil conflict oftentimes can lead to the destruction of habitat or the killing of these endangered species.